piece about the hand.
Yeah.
Matt Berkey is obviously a common topic, as Phil Hellmuth is on this podcast.
He is.
He plays interesting poker. He makes decisions that we find often questionable.
Yes.
And a lot of the time we're trying to discern whether or not his plays are actually with great foresight and thought behind them, or if maybe he's just clicking buttons a little bit and making some mistakes that are very clear mistakes, right?
Yep.
And this hand plays out in a certain way. And it's a way where in 2010, if I saw this hand, I clearly wouldn't have known who Matt Berkey was in 2010. I would just be like, oh, that's too bad for that amateur that he lost that way, you know?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's against Jonathan Duhamel, so
right.
No big spoilers here.
Right.
But Matt Berkey is still doing these things, and it's what he does in this hand is not necessarily professional level, I think. Okay, now professionals might make the same decisions that he did, but I know amateurs will make the same decisions that he did.
I mean, that's the most I've ever defended anything he's ever done. You're usually the guy.
I am usually, but I was just. I think it took me seeing Berkey out of context of being the famous Berkey that he is, to have and watch him make a play that seems somewhat pedestrian.
Yeah.
To have the realization that that's just a common play that is like okay, but like if you were pro, maybe you do a little different, you know?
Yeah.
And so maybe it is indicative of something.
This is for the nerds. This is for the brainiacs. This what we deserve. Go ahead and play it back. You ain't gonna touch me. You not gonna do nothing. You are not above me. I bet you wish you was me. I know that I know. This is for the brainiacs, this what we deserve. Go ahead and play it, man. I know it, I know.
Okay. All right. So this is the Poker Guys, and they released another episode of Your Hands. And honestly, bro, this might be like the freaking 20th episode I've seen of Matt Berkey hand histories from the Poker Guys, right? And I don't know. What are your thoughts on the amount of hand histories that they've done about you?
I mean, it's whatever, man. Honestly, like, I don't care that much, except that you and I were kind of talking about this off air yesterday and a little bit today. Our community is a little bit strange. We don't have media. So we're effectively a community of influencers. And whether you've garnered that influence through building a social media platform or building a podcast platform or just being a professional who's risen through the ranks and has garnered attention that way, ultimately, we dictate what people should care about, right? So we put a lot of the messaging out there. And whether we're talking about the Poker Guys or other pundits who kind of just operate strictly off of opinion-based responses, they're kind of like taking the place of like a Skip Bayless. And my whole thing is like, I don't care. Be as fucking critical as you want. Like, I misplay hands all the time. But do so with like due diligence. I guess the stuff that like rubs me the wrong way is the lack of preparation. I could never imagine putting myself in a situation where, at least not in 2021, where we have so many infinite resources available and the average, like, I guess the average poker IQ of viewers and listeners and watchers and followers and things like that is through the roof by comparison to 10 or 15 years ago. I couldn't imagine putting out just like my sheer opinion without having like double checked it against what strategically is sound.
Okay. So what I found interesting was the fact that they didn't know if you were a pro.
Yeah.
And I thought that was like pretty easy to find out. Like, it's like, okay, did Berkey play online? That's probably the easiest way to find out, right? It's like, okay, he has a full tilt patch on. Did Berkey play online? And it's like, even me just like skimming through 2+2 was like pretty easy to figure out that you were a pro. Like, people were like, oh, why is Berkey limping? Like, it's like, okay, you know, you were clearly playing a lot at that time, some online, some live, but I think it's like documented that you were a pro. So it was like, when they said like, oh, we don't know if he's an amateur or pro, it's like, well, that didn't take long for me to find, you know, like it was a pretty easy one. And I didn't even know you back then. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I had just chopped the Sunday Major on full tilt like 3 or 4 months ago also for like 110,000, which was on the back end of like a 300K upswing online. These numbers don't mean that much. Like, whatever. I only have $1 million in online earnings pre-Black Friday. But that was relevant considering that, like, you know, a lot of us started in college and we had the slow road, and I was a live guy, so I didn't put in a ton of volume. I think that $1 million in earnings was over like maybe 1,000 games played. So, like, you know, it was a relatively low sample, but also a ridiculous ROI. And secondarily, they were kind of treating Duhamel like he was a celebrity back then. He was as much of a, if you want to call me a no name at that point, so was he, right? It's just like, we know him for what he's done since. Same thing if you want to look at like other guys who final tabled this main event, like Joey Chong and Racner. Like I knew who those guys were because I ran around in similar circles. We played a lot of cash. We played a lot of tournaments together. But the collective world at whole or at large definitely didn't know most of that final table. They knew Affleck because he made back-to-back deep runs, and that garnered enough attention for everybody to look up Matt Affleck online and realize that he was just absolutely crushing.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a little bit of a kind of like a lack of due diligence there in terms of like looking people up. Anyway, so let's get through this hand history because it's kind of an interesting one. So this is the 2020 main event. Main event. 40 people left.
2010,
right?
but yeah,
43
people left.
What did I say?
2020.
Well, I live in modern times, Berk. There was. All right. So 2020 main event.
2010 still.
Fuck. I keep thinking. You know why, right? Because there's so many 2020 main events that it just stays in my head.
Right. Yeah.
There's more than one.
We're literally adding one retroactively.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So 2010 main event.
Yeah.
40 people left.
43 left. Yeah.
Let's start with. I'm trying to bump you up a little bit. You know what I'm saying?
I get it.
All right. Jonathan Duhamel was going to open the hijack for 2.5x off 50 big blinds.
Mm-hmm.
He has pocket eights.
Right.
You have 10-6 of diamonds in the big blind, and you call.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the Monka ranges of Berkey's big blind defense range. As you can see, 10-6 is a pure call. There are some hands here that I think potentially you might play a little bit passively at the time, but I do think that you're obviously defending all these hands. If anything, I think you were one of the people that were defending hands in 2010 more than people were, right? So like the fad of you have to defend your big blind because you're getting a good price came later than 2010, I believe.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't have been constructed completely like this. I would have folded some of these weaker low combos, and I probably would have called a lot of the ace 4, ace 3, ace 2. And to your point, I probably wouldn't have done a whole lot of 3-betting with like 8s, 9s, 10-9 suited, just because, it's 43 left in the main event, and 50 blinds is a really big stack at that point. I think average was probably like 35 or 40. So, the nature of the beast back then was to play passively. Take flops, hit bingo, win big pots with big hands.
Okay. So pretty standard, I think, so far, right? Now we're going to see a flop. The flop's going to come 6 of hearts, 6 of spades, 3 of diamonds. Pot is 1.4 million. Jonathan's going to choose... Sorry, you're going to check, which is completely standard. You're not going to have any leads on this board. Right. Jonathan's going to choose to check... Jonathan's going to choose to bet 50%. And that's not really something that we would choose today, right? So today you're going to see that the preferred size, if betting, is going to be 25% pot. But more interestingly, he's checking 60% of his range. And because there's such a mixture of hands that are being both bet and check, and the checking frequency is the dominant action, every single hand in his range is going to choose both a bet and a check. And when the bet does come through, it's going to be 25% size. Now, I think we do have to acknowledge that two things were happening in 2010. One, the checking frequency wasn't this high. People were like over c-betting for, too many hands. The frequency of c-betting was like way too high in 2010. C-betting was just like printing. Mm-hmm. And that was a function of multiple things. People weren't floating enough, et cetera, et cetera. And also the c-bet base was mostly 50%.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's important to acknowledge what the equilibrium strategy would look like in a more modern time, right?
Agreed.
Okay, so now you're going to choose to check raise to 2.5x with 10-6 of diamonds. So remember the board is 6-6-3, and you're going to choose to check raise to 625,000. I do like the check raise size. I think you could probably even like a modern time maybe even go slightly smaller, but I do like this size, and I think that's cool. I think that also in terms of your check raise, you're going to probably be doing more check raising than check calling, but we'll get to that as well. But you choose the 2.5x, and Duhamel calls.
Yep.
We see the turn, 8 of diamonds, and you're going to choose to check, which is a pretty interesting line. I think the check raise check line is not a common line, and that garnered some opinion.
Bigger spot, you're right. And also, like, Duhamel might be folding the turn if Berkey bets again. We don't know. Maybe, maybe not.
Because Berkey checks.
Yeah.
So let's discuss.
Okay.
Discussulate that, Jonathan Levy.
Because Berkey checks, that he's checking the check raise.
Yeah, it seems, and you know what, I don't hate it.
No, me either.
You'd think that if Duhamel had an overpair, which is his most likely holding at this point, it seems. He's an overpair, right? He doesn't have that many 4-5s. He doesn't have too many ace highs. He's probably just folding ace high, right?
I mean, he has 4-5 suited, but there's only 4 combos of that. And that's, besides that, I think it's just overpairs almost always.
So even if it is 4-5, 4-5 and overpairs are actually, I think, hands that are good to have this plan against. 4-5, Duhamel's betting for sure if we check, right?
I think he has to.
So we get to shut out that equity.
That is great.
And by moving in. And if he calls, it's just going to be a bad call and we get like the better end of that situation anyway.
We're fine with that.
If he has an overpair, Duhamel's probably going to bet because he's going to be like, oh, he's slowed down. Maybe he has a draw. I need to protect against that. Or maybe he has like a 3 I should try to get value from or something like that. Yeah.
I think it's fine. And I can also even understand from his point of view of like, it's okay to win the pot right now. Like, get another bet out of him and just win the pot. You know, showdowns do kill and it's the main event. Like, not that you obviously you want to call if you shove and he doesn't insta call, which in this case he would. You don't want to call in this case, but what are you going to do? But of course you want to call against kings, but like, can't be that bad to just like move in, you know, once he bets. So I don't hate this at all, is what I'm saying. I support this decision, even though my inclination would be to bet.
Yeah, I get it.
What do you think is better?
I think it's really close. I think it depends on your opponent.
Okay. So there's a couple of things I think we need to address once we land here. And the first thing is that they seem to be agreeing with a lot of the things you're saying. They seem to like say, okay, like I do like the check raise. I do think that we want to check raise check sometimes. And I think that that's where I'm a little bit confused of where the tonality of this show is going, right? Because they seem to be agreeing with a lot of things you're saying, but at the same vein, they're saying that maybe you're not a pro. Okay. There's a couple other things I think that were a little bit interesting, and it seems to me that some of the homework wasn't really done. So one of the hands that they mention here is that 5-4 is a mandatory bet,
right,
or for the in position player after the check raise,
right.
And I would say that if, you know, potentially if they did the homework and pulled the solves up, I think they would find that 5-4 suited is not going to be one of the high frequency bets. And that's because that is a hand that has too much equity to get blown off. When you do have check raise some hands, you're going to have a pretty polarized range. And if they bet a hand with that much equity, you could respond with a check raise, and then they have to blow off that entire equity of an open and a straight draw. So I think some of the homework there wasn't done, which is a little bit unfortunate. And the fact that they do start agreeing with some of your lines is a little bit, you know, I just don't understand the tone of the show right now. Okay.
Yeah, I would have thought that their biggest gripe with the hand was the check raise check, but that's actually not the case. And you know, just to catch everybody up to the strategy thus far, you know, I ran this kind of, as I mentioned, I ran it first for equilibrium, and it didn't really tell us much because Jonathan just never chooses that size, and so like the response was a little bit wonky. But we ran it again, and here you're going to see like some of the parameters I used. It's a little bit more in line with 2010. So gave Jonathan a size of 50% or 75%, which much more in line with what we saw C-bet strategies to be back then. My raise size was 2.5x or 5x. Again, a lot more in line with what we saw with check raising, though. To be fair, in 2010, check raising not super popular, right? A lot of check calling. Most of the fast playing was only done with strong hands. Imbalances obviously occurred at a pretty high rate, which is why people could still get away with c-betting most of their range for half pot. Given those flop parameters, I gave myself a turn bet size of half, 3/4, or all in. That's what the 300% represents. And I restricted myself to only check shoving or check calling once I elected to check. Jonathan, again, has standard sizes of 50 or 80. And on the river, he has sizes of 50, 80, or all in. I, again, have sizes of 50, 80, or check shoving. Oh, sorry, I also added all in, so I could open shove river. When we check out the flop strategy of how this all plays out, what you'll see is that, again, Jonathan's not betting very often. So when we restrict him to the larger size of half pot, his range actually shifts from 60% check to actually 91% check. But again, you'll see that there are a lot of hands that mix in low frequency bets. Pocket eights being one of them. It wants to bet for protection's sake. So you'll see most of the overpairs try to press their equity at some frequency. His exact combo actually chooses half pot size about 37% of the time. So very reasonable. No EV lost whenever he does choose to bet these. Anytime that we see both white and green for a candidate, it means it mixes between betting and checking. There's no EV difference between the two. The reason why we selectively mix is so that all the hands that choose to bet interact with each other in a certain way so that there's no EV loss, and all the hands that choose to check protect each other in a certain way so that there's no EV loss that way. Then looking at my response, because he is supposed to check back at such a high frequency and we have such a 6x advantage, he only has ace-6, king-6, and then the connectors 7-6, 6-6, 8-6. Because of that, we are supposed to check raise at a pretty high frequency. You see, it's actually the action we take the most outside of folding. We're check raising about just a little shy of 2x how often we call. And we do have a fair amount of pure check raises. So king 6, queen 6, jack 6, 10 6, 7 6, quads, 6 5. All these hands are check raising pure. We do have the offsuit combos too, so that gives us a whole lot more combinations of 6x. And then we do a lot of protection check raising with 3x, which albeit in 2010, I probably wasn't choosing to do. But I was at least at a point where I was choosing to check raise like gut shots and hands that wrapped around, gut shots, open enders, and hands that wrapped around the 6 itself. So it wouldn't be that shocking to see me check raise a hand like 5-7, 7-8, 5-4, hands that had reasonable playability similar to what you would see in a check raising frequency nowadays. With that said, obviously Jonathan's response is to pure call, and then we land ourselves on the turn. Once we do get to the turn, the 8 of diamonds is kind of interesting in the sense that a lot of my check raising range has now increased showdown value. So a lot of my 8x has kind of improved. My 7s have kind of gotten worse had I chosen to check raise those. So essentially what I recognized is that we're going to have to protect our checking range because we're going to be doing a lot of it after check raising flop. And as you can see, the vast majority of my range does check. 70% of the time, we're actually going to implement a check. Our only pure bet, as far as I can see, is quad 6s. So that means we're operating on mixed frequencies. There's no EV lost anytime we choose to check. So had we chosen to just check the entirety of our range, there's no EV loss here. It just makes his counter strategy maybe slightly simpler to employ against us. But my specific combination does check a third of the time, as you can see highlighted in red to the right. 10-6 of clubs actually is a little bit more aggressive, and that's just basically due to the fact that I turned the backdoor. Looking at Jonathan's response, 8 is, of course, a pure check back. A near pure check back. He's basically evenly mixing between checking and betting. But what I think is most notable here, and granted, he very rarely has this hand, but the times he does have 5-4, it never bets, as Christian kind of mentioned. Also 4-4, 5-5, also don't bet. Most of his bets are coming for straight value or protection. So you're seeing hands like 9s, 10s, jacks, queens, betting somewhere between value and protection, depending on how strong they are as overpairs. You're seeing some of his floats that may have turned a backdoor. Ace, jack of diamonds will be putting in a bet. And then we see a lot of value from his 6x region. So ace-6, king-6 pure bets, 8-6, 7-6, and 6-5 mix. They're going to be the ones he uses to protect and check back a lot. But what you'll also notice is that the vast majority of his diamond combinations, so when he floats hands like, I guess, the suited broadways, he'll be mixing in the checkbacks with diamonds for the same reason he's mixing in checkbacks with 5-4. It's just too much equity to get blown off of.
Okay. So now we're going to get to the river. The river is going to come the deuce of clubs. So now the board reads 6-6-3, 8 with a backdoor flush draw, deuce of clubs. Mm-hmm. And you're going to go with a 75% pot size, which is a little bit uncommon, but I think probably at the time acceptable. And I think most options would be like either 50 or all in now, but I think it's whatever. And now Duhamel chooses to shove, which is crazy because you have this guy from Europe with a hoodie staring you down and just says, I'm all in with a PokerStars net patch while you have the full tilt patch on. All the eyes are on you. The camera, I see like the audience in the back. Tough spot. And I think we have to, see what people think about this spot.
Yeah. This is a real problem. We need him to have 9-6 and massively overvalue it. That's like, or we need him to be bluffing. He's turning an overpair into a bluff. That's the only other thing. Did people do that in 2010?
He's turning pocket fives or pocket fours into a bluff.
Yes, pocket fives or pocket fours. No, I don't know if they did that in 2010 either, but that would be the play, right?
Yeah, I mean, pocket fives and pocket fours probably can't call, right? So it's either shove or fold. Those are the best bluffing hands.
Those are great bluffing hands.
Yeah. To put Duhamel on being capable of turning fours or fives into a bluff and then pulling the trigger against us on day 7 of the main event.
When the deuce comes. And like,
I know we have trips, but
I think this is
Berkey calls pretty quickly.
This feels like a pretty big mistake.
That's what I was referring to at the beginning of the podcast when I was saying, like, I could see why you would go broke here, like most players. But if you're really like an elite pro, like Berkey seems to think he is, and a lot of people do think he is too. He is SOLVER and all that stuff. Christian Soto respects his game. That means a lot, right? And to be fair, this is 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's 10 years ago.
But this is a fold, right?
It's a fold. I think it's definitely a fold. Look, Berkey disagrees on a lot of things clearly that we think. I'd be really surprised if he didn't think this was a fold today.
Yeah.
And if I even think about it, if anything, he's adjusted the other way, where he's fair to call him out as like, he's supposedly this pro, because it's 10 years ago, man.
No,
like everything was different.
I wasn't calling him out like that. It was more in reference to our ongoing discussion about like if Berkey's actually ahead of the curve or not.
Right.
And like,
I just don't think this hand is a good way. It's a good piece of evidence either way, because it's just too long ago. That's my thought.
I suppose, yeah, it is too long ago, but I would hope that today Berkey would find a fold easily.
I mean, I would be really surprised if he didn't say I sucked in 2010.
Yeah.
Like from his point of view.
Right.
Because that's what most players would say.
Although these days this might be more of a call because we block full houses and our opponents are way more capable of turning fours and fives into a bluff.
A guy like Duhamel, you may really have to call.
Yeah.
But you have to know that it's Duhamel. And back then,
All right, a couple of things I need to say. Like, first of all, Duhamel's not European; he's Canadian, so I forgot about that.
He's French descent. It's okay.
Yeah, whatever. He's like French Canadian, bro. You're like halfway across the fucking ocean at that point.
No, you're not.
Okay. There's a couple other things, right? And again, it's one of these things where it's like, okay, if I was coming at Phil Ivey, right? Like I'm not coming. First of all, I'm not disrespecting Phil Ivey, but if one day, like I got a little bit hyped and I was like disrespecting Phil Ivey, I would be like, hey. Or better example, like Doug Polk, right? Like people think I have beef with Doug Polk, right? Like if I was saying like, yo, Doug, I think you played this hand like shit, I would do my homework, right? So again, I think we land on the river where they're saying fours and fives are like the bluffs.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear, like on the solver output, that fives and fours never bluff. They sometimes call,
which they said they never call.
Right. Fives and fours they said fives and fours can never call. They could only bluff. These are the automatic bluffs, and that's just false.
Right.
Right. So the bluffs are not being derived from fives and fours. Some bluffs are being derived from ace deuce, right? Which is a rivered. Effectively, you're using the rivered house, right? Like you're blocking the rivered house, right? And you're stealing some bluffs from there. You're stealing some bluffs from hands like Queen Jack suited, right? That bricked off in terms of like unblocking diamonds, right? We're going to be stealing from there. Now, so it's a little bit of me not really, like, I don't understand where they just didn't run it, right? It's just, that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we are talking about a hand in 2010. So they're somewhat right? Like this hand in practice in 2010, it should be played extremely exploitably. I do think that it's fairly reasonable to arrive at a fold once I choose to bet. So like if we take a look at like what the actual equilibrium solve says, I'm just supposed to be ripping, right? I'm just supposed to be value shoving here. I'm supposed to be value shoving relatively wide. All my 6x, all my 5-4, all my full houses, they just all like open rip. I'm not really doing too much betting. So when I do choose a bet size, and for what it's worth, actually 10-6 of clubs, if I get there this way, chooses the size that I chose, but it's just because it unblocks him having diamonds to then bluff with.
Right, you're trying to induce.
Right, but this is all much to do about nothing because obviously in 2010, solvers weren't a thing yet, and none of us were thinking this way. We all built from value out, and we worked in bluffs as we kind of landed on them, right? So yeah, fives and fours, terrible bluffing candidates as a whole, but I could, I guess, see I don't see where anybody bluffs with those in 2010. I think it would be more like, and I know this is wild to kind of say, but like the ace kings just like randomly find a way to be all in on river because they don't know what the fuck else to do, right? Like, do you remember like pre Black Friday, pre solvers where people just wowed out with like hands that they thought were really good at one point in time? and then just like
ace 7 offsuit.
Yeah, I mean, you're referencing Joey Chong from the same main event, I guess. But yeah, like, you know, like things get like ace 7 off was like the first demonstration of misunderstanding blockers, right? Like, oh, I have an ace, therefore removal, therefore he can't have good hands. Like, let's just play an ICM suicide.
This is the thing though. Like they are saying 4s and 5s are the best hands today.
I know. I know.
So,
right.
But they're not.
Right. No, of course they're not. And that's just, again, like, I think that they think they're more well-versed than they are in theory, perhaps. But yeah, you know, the vast majority of his shoving range on the end is going to be a spectrum of value. So he gets thin with like some ace 8. He gets thin with 10s, with jacks, because I guess conceivably I can have worse. I don't necessarily think that these are good. And also, this isn't squared for proportion. So like those hands don't really land here on the river much at all. You can see it's only 1.6 combos that he's actually shoving. So, you know, really basically what we're saying is that we just don't get here through this line very often. You know, kind of due to the fact that I guess like he's betting a fair portion of those hands on the turn. The overpairs and stuff for protection's sake. So, you know, it kind of is what it is.
Some of them also check back the flop. So it's like a multitude.
That's really the big thing. Him betting the flop is what reduces this now to like a 1%er type of line work. I also ran this locking him for a mandatory c-bet. We didn't display that solve because I thought it would take up too much time. But if we force him to bet flop, which now doesn't allow us to say like this is a 1% line that never happens kind of thing. If we force him to bet flop, my response is actually to check raise almost 50% of my hands. And then I'm checking on the turn again, like 70 to 80%. So my hand actually almost pure check raise checks. And we land on river and he starts pulling bluffs from all kind of places. A lot of his 8X seemingly is either going for bluff or value. It's really difficult to tell the way it's kind of like all merging together. But he does a lot of bluffing with like broadways that call the check raise on the flop and then land on river and unblock diamonds. So it kind of goes for it with like queen 10 of spades, queen 10 of club, those type of holdings, trying to, I assume, get me off of like ace highs, 3X, 8X, perhaps, and moving on down the line. The whole point of talking about this, though, is I think that if you want to come from a standpoint of criticism, whether it's opinion-based or not, I think you have to have a fundamental metric by which you're measuring things by. And that's really what we were just trying to demonstrate, I think, by running this and showing what the equilibrium is. I think if we node lock for like what was actually taking place, so where we do force the c-bet out of Jonathan and we reduce my check raising range, because I'm obviously not check raising 50%, say we reduce it to like 12%. Now I think that you will see a lot of like wonky things happening that arrive us at rivers in spots where like bluffs are available, but nobody pulled those triggers, right? Like if we locked all that, I'm probably supposed to be betting the river a lot more than shoving. And he's probably supposed to start reaching for shoves with other hands. I still don't think 5s and 4s will be used, but like, you know, like I said, the broadways and stuff like that. But it just wasn't happening in 2010, right? So if we just continually node lock it down to where it's just a purely exploitative strategy, I think what you're going to find is that like, yeah, I probably should just ultimately arrive at a fold because he might not even be shoving 5-4 there. He might not be shoving worse 6X, whereas in the solve, he's shoving all of his 6X, which means we dominate 6-5, 7-6, 9-6 if he has it. I don't think we gave it to him, but you know, whatever. And then
but you also it's probably all of nothing, right? Because you should just be shoving all in and getting called.
Also true.
Like if he's not shoving through with 6-7, then you have to get max value and shove your hand.
Yeah.
Like, it's just that simple.
The point I'm just trying to make is that it's unfair for them to examine it strictly through an exploitative node without ever examining it through what theory looks like, and then double back and say, well, according to theory, he should be doing this, 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 and this. Because it doesn't make any fucking sense. It doesn't make any sense to say, in theory, we should be grabbing this selection of hands and utilizing them as bluffs, but it was 2010 and nobody played according to theory anyway. So based on that knowledge, like this should be folded, this should be folded, this should be folded, whatever. You know, I think that like the reason this hand is strange to me is because if you're going to pluck a hand out of the last 10 years that has aged okay, I feel like this one's probably aged fine. Maybe the call off isn't great, but I don't really think there's a whole lot of exploitation taking place here.